Dyna ni, wel prynhawn da iawn I chi a chroeso cynnes I chi i'r Llyfrgell Genedlaethol. Very warm welcome to you to the Drum and to the National Library on another wonderful Friday afternoon. It's great to have you with us here in person, but also a warm welcome to those of you who are joining us online as well. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Professor Gareth Wyn Jones to the library, and he will be discussing his new book, which you might have noticed on the way in, and there'll be an opportunity for you to purchase that book on the way out as well. The topic of the book, as you might be aware, is about energy and power and the way that they're fundamental to all human enterprise. But while energy transactions are essential and indeed addictive, they can also be toxic to human society. And in this lecture, Gareth suggests that humanity faces some very hard decisions and must rethink some of most cherished assumptions about how we use energy, both locally and on our planet's scale. So, as I mentioned already, Gareth is a Professor of Plant Biology and Bioscience at Bangor University. He's also former Director of the Centre of Arid Zone Studies. He was also Chief Scientist and Deputy Chief Executive for the Countryside Council of Wales. And he's also the author of the book that I just mentioned, Energy and Power, Our Perilous Obsessions. So, with those many words, I will ask Gareth to come up and address us in his lecture. Traddodi oedd y gair o'n i'n meddwl amdano fo'n Gymraeg, ac o'n i'n gallu cyfieithu. So, and give his lecture. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi. Rwy'ch croeso cynnes.
Well, dwi siarad yn Saesneg, cofiwch. It's going to be very strange addressing this audience in English because most of you I know speak Welsh. But so be it. That's the arrangement today. It's an amazing experience to be in the National Library of Wales to speak. My father would be so proud. He was on the board for many, many years, and he was the vice llywydd, I can't translate quickly enough, the vice president for many, many years. In those days, I don't think there was a time limitation. Once you were on, you were on. And he would have been delighted. So thank you very much. And my thanks are due primarily to the two gentlemen sitting on the far side there. John Gower, who took up this project of trying to make sure that these ideas were transmitted into society, and then Ali Anwar has taken it up, and Ali is responsible for the book and for supporting me in ways which is I find unbelievable. So my sincere thanks to you both for this and this opportunity to talk in this august institution. As you can see, challenging the energy consensus. The first thing to say is this lecture is not about high-grade physics. It's about us. It's about people and how we cope with our relationship with energy. So the book, which has been produced thanks to the Hum Foundation, Energy and Power. Energy is one of the most amazing constructs of modern science because it tells us that there is a unity between a lump of coal, a sack of flour, water coming down a waterfall, and the electricity going through a cable to create these lights. It's an amazing concept. And this is at the heart of all life and of all civilization. And so we are entirely dependent upon it, yet I am suggesting that this relationship can become toxic for reasons I hope I will be able to explain to you in the course of the next 3/4 of an hour. The first thing to say is the ubiquity of energy. And I start with this quotation from a very well-known Canadian physicist called Sim. And I'll read this out to you, but you will also, I'm sure, read it. All natural processes, and the emphasis is on all natural processes and all human actions are, in the most fundamental physical sense, transformations of energy. This mysterious thing, energy, which is embodied in so many aspects of our lives. Civilization's advances can be seen as a quest for the higher energy use required to produce increased food harvests, to mobilize a greater output and variety of materials, to produce more and more diverse goods, to enable higher mobility, to create access to virtually unlimited amounts of information. So energy is at the heart of everything we do, and we take it almost for granted. But I'm actually suggesting that there's a problem. And that problem I've summarized in these propositions. Over the years, the amount of energy that's been used has accelerated enormously, and I will document this in the talk. But this acceleration itself, I'm suggesting, carries a threat to human well-being. The crucial point I'm making is that is regardless of the source of that energy or of the power. Let's just define our terms. Energy allows you to do work. The more work you do per unit time, the more power you have in physics. I think you can apply that power concept, and we'll explore this a little bit, to human life as well. But because the original definition is basically just straight physics. So regardless of the source of the energy. Now, the great discussion that is going on around the world and is being magnificently undermined by President Trump at the moment in totally irresponsible ways is, of course, that certain types of energy source carry very specific risks. And the one we're all aware of is global warming, anthropogenic climate change. That is a risk associated with a particular source of energy. Other particular sources of energy carry other risks. Nuclear energy carries obvious risks of explosions, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, etc., etc. But even wind energy carries risks to birds. And there is no source of energy that I can think of which doesn't have a potential risk attached to it, even though I put in the slide many sources, because as a scientist I'm very cautious and I don't want to say all and be over the top. But the crucial point is that many sources have their own specific risks. And I'm suggesting that even if we solve climate change, solve global warming, we still have an energy issue. And that's what I'm going to try and explain to you this afternoon. The basis of it is in this little diagram what I'm putting up now. Energy is the driver. Energy, the more energy you have, the more work you can do. The more work you can do per unit time, therefore the more power you have. That means that more events take place in a given time, the more energy there is. And you can trace this through history. If you read the first of these books, that's what it's about. It's about tracing that change over time. And I'll allude to it very briefly in this talk. The more power and work you do, the more events take place, and the more material and social complexity that arises. Right? There is actually a lot of information behind that, But I really don't have time this afternoon to go into the detail of that. There are confounding factors that we have to appreciate in this. The relationship between energy and work depends on how well it's coupled. And so over the years, the coupling has changed. And so the link has become more or less efficient depending on how well a society couples the use of energy to work and power. The acceleration I alluded to originally, this acceleration is quite extraordinary, and I'll try and show you in another couple of slides. Clearly, when you have material and social complexity, it requires material. So as the life has become more complex, think of all the materials that have gone into this room. Think of all the materials that have gone into this building. Think of all the materials that go into our lives on an everyday basis. I'll give you a few numbers later on. But we just don't appreciate just how much and each of these requires energy to produce it. Each of these has embodied energy within it. The other elements which is complex in this is that complexity has a degree of instability associated with it. You could argue we're seeing this in the financial system at the moment. It's a highly complex system. It's very easily undermined by some black swan event or some irresponsible event or just something happening. So complexity requires stabilization. And perhaps the easiest way to think of this is in terms of the human body and the homeostatic mechanisms that we have in order to maintain our stability. So you need your bloodstream to be at a given temperature, a given pH, a given pressure, a blood pressure, heart pumping. Your electrolytes need to be at the right balance. Your kidneys have to function. So in order for us to exist second by second, there are a whole range of regulatory things that we're unaware of, which are keeping us going all the time. And that is true of us, but it's also true of the simplest single-cell bacteria. It has to be able to respond to signals, to move to where there's food or away from heat or whatever it might be. So associated with any complex system is regulation. To give you an example, just you think of when we moved from going on horseback to going on cars, the regulations that are now required to maintain transportation systems. It is quite extraordinary, and aeroplanes and all these things, the faster you go, the more regulation you need in order for it to be safe. The Welsh Government thinks it should be 20 miles an hour in many places in order to be safe. That's a regulation. And the other thing is, and there's no time to go into this, I'm afraid, there is a close relationship between energy and information. As energy is embedded in material, information is also embedded in it. So all the time in this talk, we'll be following the link between energy and information. Right, so that's the model. And you can think of the history of this planet and life on this planet as an arrow of increasing complexity. About 4 million years ago, 4 billion years ago, 4,000 million years ago, there'd be a single cell. And now we have complexes of 20 million people living in a megacity. Incredibly complicated to regulate and to maintain energy flow into that system compared with a simple single cell 4 billion years ago. So as we've seen, more and more dynamic complexity, more and more embedded information and material, faster and faster change. And in that book, I try to outline a series of step changes that have been when new energy regimes have come in. I'll mention one or two of them in a minute. Each of these steps brings in new potential, and the best example is us. We are more complicated than other animals. We have a brain function and we have new potential that other animals don't have because of our ability to actually process data efficiently over the years. Regulations, as well as being biological, have become legal. So we created a whole range of information, of systems in order to stabilize our society and our interactions with each other. There are also new dangers, and we'll allude to these at the end, but I want to stress this dependency. The arrow of complexity is not a one-way street. There is a continuous dependency. We are dependent on the bacteria. Each one of us has as many bacterial cells within us as we have human cells, which is an astounding fact. We think of ruminant cattle as being a symbiotic relationship, but we are. We don't produce methane like the cattle to the same extent, but a bit. But, we are symbiotes with the organisms that are within us. So what are the consequences of this in terms of the issues? I will give you a lot of information on the speed of change in a moment. Can we cope with this speed of change? That's the first question I want to. Are our social and political systems keeping up with the rate at which everything is now changing around us? I'm sure the National Library thinks at times it can't, because of the pressures that have been placed upon it. With this type of change, the next question is, of course, are we keeping up now? And I suggest we're probably not. Who will benefit and who will lose out from a continuing increase in the speed of change? And if we're already failing, in what areas are we failing? Now, the obvious example of failure is environmental, but there are also social and economic failures. This is a very well-known slide, isn't it? Hopkins is temperature diagram with these stripes. This is just a visual presentation of climate change. I'm sure you've all seen it many times, showing how in the last few decades, the rate of the rise in the global surface temperature has increased hugely. The point to make, it is only one of a number of examples where, if I can get the right thing, you can see this is the area where we are relatively safe, and these are the these are plastics and chemicals, climate change, biodiversity loss, woodlands loss, pollution and geochemical cycles, all of which we're exceeding safe limits. So it's not just climate change, which is a problem. The whole relationship of humanity with the biosphere is an increasing problem. There are three areas. Ozone depletion is the one success story where we have accommodated and regulated effectively a useful technical innovation, fridges. Ocean acidification is getting worse and worse. This one is an interesting one. This is sulfur pollution in the atmosphere. It's going down, and because it's going down, it's actually increasing the forcing. So it is actually making things worse as well as making things better. What are the economic challenges? Well, obviously, we're living it in Wales. The rust belts, the coal mines. In America, many industries have become redundant very, very quickly. They come up and they go down again. Social change, the obvious example of a problem of regulating the speed of change is the social media and artificial intelligence. Are we regulating the social media effectively, or are the social media, in fact, taking advantage of particularly young children? I'm an old man. I don't know the answer to that, but a lot of people are concerned about it. And this relates to the impact on our mental health and our self-worth. One gets the impression, and I don't know if it's true, that young people are under much, much more emotional stress now than they ever have been. I'm not of the generation that knows, but it's the impression that one gains that the speed of change and the speed of innovation is now itself causing a problem. What I want to do now is give you just a very brief outline of some numbers of how our dependence on energy has changed over the years. The first Homo species, Homo erectus, probably arrived about 1.8 million years ago on Earth, and it represented a very important innovation in evolution. An investment of energy in our brains, not in our brawn. This is unique. The only species on Earth which invests 20 to 25% of their energy in their brains for information processing are Homo species. And this started about 1.8 million years ago. For it to have started, almost certainly we had to master cooking, because as you probably know, if you eat uncooked food, the digestibility is very low and the energy you get is very low. So in order to evolve in a human way, we have to master the art of increasing the energy content of our food by cooking it. So that's a long, long time ago by our standards, but by the standards of the 4 billion years ago, it's a second or two ago, right? It's a second or two ago. About 300,000 years, Homo sapiens came on the scene, but not alone. The likelihood is that until about 50,000 years ago, there were at least 4 types of Homo species on Earth. Sapiens, Neanderthal, Denisovians, and the Floresiensis. It's a very difficult word to say. And so there was competition between different Homo species until about 50,000 years ago. And we triumphed for whatever reason. Were we more intelligent? Were we more sensible? Who knows? And then there was a huge change with the coming of the agricultural revolutions, particularly the one in Baghdad. But there were others around the world as well, but we are the inheritors of what shall we call it, the Arab agricultural revolution? And then more recently, what I would like to look at is the energy side of this. If you look at hunter-gatherer, we as human beings have a basic metabolic requirement for about 2,000 food calories per day to exist. I'm putting it in these units because these are the units that are all in popular magazines. So 2,000 calories per day, a basic requirement. It goes up. If you're a hunter-gatherer, you've got to hunt, you've got to run, you've got to cook. So there's an additional requirement, so it's about 4,000. And that was how mankind lived, and our ancestors, for well over a million years. Well over a million years. And then very recently, about 10,000 years ago, suddenly agriculture came. And as a result of agriculture, societies developed which were using about 30 to 40,000 calories per day. A huge change. by the agricultural revolution. If you now, but all dependence on photosynthesis, all dependence on energy from the sun over the next couple of years. If you then go to the Industrial Revolution, I'm called it Homo energeticus or Homo economicus. You can make up whatever title you enjoy. Then we now use about 250,000 kilocalories today to maintain our lifestyle. So it's an absolutely astronomical change. And this has occurred simply in the last 250 years. So it's a big change that's taken place extremely quickly. And the cause for this, of course, was the ability to utilize fossil fuels. So we've developed a world for the last 250 years, which is entirely dependent on this ability to mobilize fossil fuels. And I love this quotation. Matthew Boulton was the industrialist, and James Watt was the inventor. And Matthew Boulton said, "I sell here what the world desires to have, power." And that power has transformed the world since 1776. It's happened quite slowly initially, and but there has been since then a great acceleration. I'll leave that. Let's just look at the slides, because it's more dramatic than just looking at the writing. This is global energy demand on this axis, and the time since 1800. So James Watt was about here. And look at the rates at which energy use has gone up, the blue line, and in parallel the population of the world has soared at the same time. If you go back here, the population was about 800 million. This stops about at 2010. The population of the world now is over 8 billion. And the energy demand has been going up and continues to go up at roughly the rate shown on this graph. So this is an enormous change that has taken place in a very short time, and you can see that most of the change is actually since 1900. This was the 1800s was the preparation for the change, and then it's taken off. This is another graph showing roughly the same thing. This is energy on this axis, and the years on this shows, I think, something people don't appreciate at all. I hadn't really appreciated it until recently. The blue is biomass, and the demand for biomass has actually gone up, not gone down. We haven't replaced one energy with another. We've added energy from different sources. And if you look at coal, you can see coal really started to take off in the late Victorian era. And this is, when Cardiff was at its peak, and, the Welsh valleys were flourishing. And then on top of that came oil, and then gas, and a little bit of hydro, and a little bit of nuclear. But they are additive. We haven't replaced one fuel with another. We've added another fuel. And in Aberystwyth here, if you look around here, you've got great plantations of Sitka spruce. Why? Props for coal mines. The idea was that we would be mining coal, and in order to mine the coal, you needed a supply of props. And so they forested much of mid Wales in order to get props. So coal created a demand for wood. When you put the railways across America, you had to put sleepers in. And this excellent book, which is a very recent book by a Frenchman, Frezos, is about the way the demand for energy is additive. Whereas everybody talks about getting rid of one to get another, that's just not, has never happened historically. It's a myth that energy demand. And the result of this is wealth, undreamt of wealth. This is the only two graphs I can find trying to plot human wealth for the last 10,000 years. You can see it's basically flat for almost all the time. And then suddenly, just over here, it goes up. This is really since 1900. Since 1900, there's been an enormous change in the wealth of the world because we've been exploiting all this energy. Right. I hope you've established to your satisfaction now that human well-being and wealth depends on cheap energy. It's the creed of any government all over the world. And we're hooked. We're addicted. That's why I used it in the title, we're addicted. We're hooked on any cheap energy dependent economic growth to create work and to create our own well-being. And any graph like this is unsustainable. There's no way that can keep on going up and up and up in that way without causing some sort of explosion. Behind this, there is a lot of behavioral psychology. There's no time to go into this, but there's a lot of interesting work on the way humans are so reluctant to give up what they've got. We are averse to giving up any advantage that we have. And we're also very bad at assessing risk. There's a lot of behavioral psychology on our inability to actually come to terms with different sorts of risks. And that's what we're facing at the moment. And this pursuit of power, I think, is a central issue. Lotka and Odin have suggested that in ecology, the pursuit of sufficient power is essential for ecological evolutionary success. And I fear that is true for us as well, which means that this pursuit of power is hardwired into people, into human beings. But as I say, there are huge issues about each energy store and about energy by itself. I'll come back to this, but it's worth pointing out just how difficult it is to transmit, to change from a fossil fuel dependent system to some other system with a different energy source. It's not at all a straightforward issue, and there are no free meals, absolutely no free meals. I'd like to use the climate change issue to illustrate very briefly with you the three human responses that appear to be active in the world at the moment. We have the denier response, which is now, of course, dominant in the United States. Deny, delay, disparage, and doubt, I put down there. This is leading now to a complete denial of science. It's not only denial, in order to maintain the myth of Trumpian infallibility, you've got to not only deny the science of climate change, but also lots of other aspects of science, and universities are now under huge threats in the United States. So that's the one response. The other response, the main response, is to say, agree in principle, yes, we need to make emission cuts, we need to recognize net zero, we need to move away to another source of energy, but not at the expense of growth. This is what Starmer is saying all the time. And Starmer's not alone. I'm not getting at Starmer personally, but he represents an attitude which is prevalent in virtually all developed countries and in a lot of developing countries. It's true in India, it's true in China. That's what they make me good. St. Augustine, I think, said, make me good, but not just yet. That's how politicians are feeling. And the fallback position is that we'll be bailed out by technology. Technology will bail us out. Nuclear will bail us out. All carbon capture and storage will bail us out. Or umbrellas in the sky will bail us out. Something is going to bail us out because we have to maintain economic growth, because social stability and political success depend on more energy use. That's the mainstream position. That's the denial. I call this techno-tina. It's a bit like a disco. Tina, there's no alternative. And that's how most people feel, I would say. And then there's the climate Armageddon group, Extinction Rebellion, rapidly prioritizing rapid emission cuts, move to no growth, a circular economy or a donut economy. There are lots of versions out there, and what I call militant despair, which is, I suppose, where I stand, because that's the other logical option. I'd like to illustrate to you just the power that is expressed in the techno-optimists' manifesto. The techno-optimists feel that the answer to all these problems lies in technology. You may have heard of Mark Andreessen. Mark Andreessen is one of the main backers of the Trump election. He put millions of dollars in, and he has a very successful career in Silicon Valley and is a billionaire. You don't talk about millionaires now, you talk about billionaires, don't you? And this, I would recommend everybody to read the Techno-Optimist Manifesto by Mark Andreessen. If you're not frightened now, you will be on your Reddit. At least that's how I feel about it. We believe energy should be on an upward spiral. Energy this is a small part of a very large manifesto, by the way, right? Energy is the foundational engine of our civilization. I agree with him on that. That's about the only thing we do agree with. The more energy we have, the more people we can have. The more people you can have, of course, the more demand you will have. So that graph that I showed earlier on should go up and up and up. And the better everyone's lives can be, that I doubt. We should raise everyone to the energy consumption levels we have, and then increase our energy 1,000-fold. And then raise anybody else's energy 1,000-fold as well. If you go back to my original little diagram, that means you're speeding up that relationship vastly. Everything will change more and more quickly. Everything will become more and more complex. The logic of that is that a new elite will arrive, able to cope with that situation. And it will be some sort of hybrid between humans and AI. They're experimenting now with people with things in their brains. That's the logic of that. It's not an illogical outcome. It's a perfectly logical. The question is it what humanity wants? Is that what we would like? Is that what our moral compass would lead to? That I doubt. So these are the impacts. More material. The other thing that has to be stressed, The more energy you use, the more material you use. So the greater the demands you inevitably will make on the biosphere, on those other things that I've showed earlier. It's quite inevitable. It's basic physics. It's so basic, that people are ignoring it. And the speed of social change, and how well will we and our. I'm a great grandfather. Little Ellis is 4 months old. Bless him. What will be his? I'm 85. When Ellis is 85, what sort of world will be if we go in that direction? Quite frankly, I think it would be disaster. The other thing is that the more you accelerate, the more complexity you create, the more regulation you need. You'll have to, when things are that complicated, you will actually need more regulation. And the danger is that we will become serfs in a highly regulated system if you go down that road. And as I said, there's every likelihood there will be new elites able to utilize these new opportunities. Just as humans have been able to dominate, then another group will come and dominate us. That's the danger. We don't have time to go into the information side anymore. Right. That's simply to remind you that we're already pushing the world into serious trouble. Never mind plus 1,000-fold amount of energy. Right, so realism in this context is very difficult because there are conflicting realities. I would claim that the current mainstream trajectory, for the want of a better word, the Starmer line, is also completely unrealistic, because the idea that you can just put everything off and go for growth and still obtain net zero in 2050 is a myth. It's for the birds. It isn't happening. It won't happen. And we will then be looking at climate change. Just a couple of numbers. I don't want to go into this too much. But when we talk, we've reached 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial norm already. Not on average, but for an individual year. These numbers are potentially misleading. When we talk about a global average, we must remember that the Earth is 70% water, ocean, and the increase in air temperature over the oceans is slower than over the land. So if the global mean is 1.5, it means that over land it's about 2. So if it's about 2 over the globe, it'll be about 3 over land, and it's not evenly distributed, so it means that in the poles it'll be 6-7 degrees. It means that all the ice in Greenland will melt. So, when we talk about 2 degrees, 2.5, it sounds quite benign, really. It doesn't sound very much, but it isn't at all benign. It's extremely dangerous. So the mainstream is not very realistic. The Technocracy Manifesto is, to my mind, completely unrealistic, right? And yet it has a powerful impact, and a lot of money behind it. Massive retraction. We don't know how to do it. One of the reasons we don't know how to do it is that this wealth has been associated with a massive redistribution of wealth as well. There's massive wealth and dire poverty. And that is associated. The people that are wealthy have the highest energy demand and the highest carbon footprint by at least 100-fold. If you look at the carbon footprints of a place like Qatar or the Athro Emeritws, we're talking about over 30 tons of CO2 equivalents per head per year. If you're looking at the poorer countries in Africa, it's less than 0.1. So that's 300-fold. The money and energy use go together. And human nature suggests that humans will be very reluctant to give it up. Those that have don't give it up regularly. So we need new dreams, new aspirations. Let me try and end with a little bit of optimism. Because, you know, the scenario is very pessimistic. If we were to use less energy in our lives, as I try to do, would we therefore be happier? I think we probably would. If we slow down a bit, I think we would actually. Also, I think it's more practical. I was talking in Pwllheli last week, and the grid in Penllyn is chock-a-block, because it's an old grid system and it's chock-a-block. If you're going to decarbonise Llyn, or I'm sure it's true in Ceredigion at this time now, then you're going to have to put new transmission lines up everywhere. Those transmission lines are going to be extremely unpopular. Nobody wants them. If you had local energy and a decrease in energy demand, you would decrease the demand for new transmission lines. You would localise the process of the production and the use, and hopefully make people more self-reliant, and also make people more capable of defining their own lives. So, I say, so possibly, am I being completely mad? I may well be. I'm sure a lot of people think so. Anthropogenic global warming may be actually an opportunity. You know, because we can say that no, in order to combat climate change, we need to decrease demand. This will then have a secondary effect of actually slowing down change, hopefully reducing complexity and reducing the investment that is required in coping with that change. So maybe there are alternatives, but they're not being worked on. And they're not being worked on because I think the model that we have is simply wrong. And this talk may be a small contribution to developing a more realistic model. In order for you, I'd like you to end with a couple of ponderings. I'm sure some of you saw the film Oppenheimer. It was a very good film. And in that film, the baddie was a man called Lewis Strauss, who was after Oppenheimer and trying to fix him. But Lewis Strauss was a very important scientist in the States and was a great booster of nuclear energy in the early 50s. And he is reputed to, it's quoted, it's not a saying, that's in fact, nuclear energy would be such a great success that it would be cheap to meter. Everybody would have cheap nuclear electricity, too cheap to meter. Had that happened, had that promise been fulfilled, would we have solved the environmental and the social and the political problems of the world? I would suggest not. That in fact having another cheap energy source would probably make things worse. And so, you know, and think also about Wales. Had Wales not had coal, had the world not had coal, what would the world be like? It's very interesting to rewrite history in your mind and what might have evolved. And the last thing to say is that information technology is not a simple fix because it's highly energy dependent. The demand, the techno-optimist people would have create a huge energy demand. A Bitcoin transaction, I understand. I don't know how many of you have Bitcoins in the audience here. You don't look like a Bitcoin audience, really. You may be a Bitcoin audience, a secret Bitcoin accumulators. One uses 27 days of the average US home energy supply. 27 days. In the US, the average energy use, electricity use in a house is about 27 kilowatts. In Britain, it's about 10. So 27 by 27 is quite a substantial number. And that's what one Bitcoin transaction. And Chatbox GT, I'm told, uses 500,000 kilowatt hours per day already. And that is almost all generated by burning fossil fuels. So we really are in a difficult situation. And I do like this. Try not to notice that it's 1857. When plunder becomes a way of life for a group of people, a group of men, I think men probably is significant there. Thilos would agree, I'm sure. When plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, over the course of time, they create for themselves a legal system that authorises it, a moral code that glorifies it, and Kevin Anderson of Manchester, Manchester suggests it, expert to justify it, and I suggest media to support it. So we have that for energy. We have also that for fossil fuels. And I rest my case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Gareth. Diolch yn fawr iawn. May I ask you one question in order to buy the audience some time to maybe think of their own? Since I was first introduced to some of your thinking on these matters, it seems to me that there is a new revolution, let's call it AI, which is speeding up everything. Yep. Comes at the end of this, and it's been happening literally since we first met and started to talk about things. And lots of people will think that AI, which is promoted by Starmer and the people from Silicon Valley who've now moved into the Oval Office in the White House, it's suggested it's somehow benign. Yeah, that all of this is energy free or not energy dependent. But in fact, it's the most gargantuan energy drain, is it not?
Absolutely. It's also a water drain as well, which makes it even worse. But it's okay. Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Ali last night. I mean, they call that you store things in the cloud, and it sounds beautifully benign. You know, it's in the information is up there. It's in the cloud, but in fact, it has a physical presence in a farm of servers, which have to be energized and have to be cooled. And I saw yesterday, I think that the demand for energy for the cloud in N years' time, my friend, I don't remember how long, will be 3 times the Japanese demand. You know, the extrapolation is absolutely horrendous. And of course, I have many friends and colleagues who spend half their life taking photographs, maybe of what they've eaten for lunch, and putting it on the web, in the cloud, for people to admire what a wonderful lunch they've had, or what a wonderful baby they have, or, you know, whatever. You know, and all this is then stored indefinitely, whereas the total energy demand in the world is going up about 2% per year. The demand for that sector of energy is going up, I don't know what percentage, but I would have, if something is going up 10% per year, it means it doubles every 7 years. The simple maths, 10% per year, And I'm sure the amount of stuff which is actually put into the cloud is going up more than 10% a year. I would guess so. But yes, you're right.
I asked a question in order to buy the audience some time. You've given us lots of food for thought there. Would someone like to ask a question or respond? And then ask microphones.
Diolch yn fawr i chi am sgwrs hynod ddifyr. Thank you very much, very interesting talk. What I can't quite get my head around is the fact that society is becoming, as you say, more and more complex, or at least these issues are, which seems to imply we need more and more experts. And yet this scepticism of experts in Britain and elsewhere, how I mean, I just can't get, for me, I can't get my head around this cognitive dissonance. Who are the experts, when we talk about experts to help justify, who are these experts? People like the Health Secretary in the United States. I mean, sorry, that's not really a question, but I just wonder what you thought about that, because I don't know how we face the future with any confidence when we have these so-called experts justifying, well, things which are, in my opinion, unjustifiable.
I don't know who the experts are, but one of my concerns is that economics is a subject which doesn't relate to its consequences. One of the worries is that they have externalities, and they're environmental externalities. And if you close a factory down, and put all bodies closed for whatever it might be, that doesn't count in the way we do our economics. And it seems to me that, and I'm not an economist, and it's very difficult to get economists to engage with this. I have one colleague in Cardiff University who's seriously engaged and is interested, but not many. But there are very good environmental economists. There's an excellent book by Kate, what's her name? Huh? Yeah, Kate, yeah. She's the daughter of the lady, the sister of the girl who leads the news, called Donut Economics, which is an excellent book. And what she says is great. The trouble is, she doesn't say how you get from A to B. Because we're hooked on the system now, how do we unhook ourselves without going cold turkey, if you like? I mean, to follow that analogy. It seems to me that the likeliest thing to happen is that there will be a major crash. And after a major crash, we have to rethink. It's a bit like, my analogy is the end of the Roman Empire. There'll be a crash, and then things will pick up again. I don't think, humanity won't disappear or anything like that, but, there'll be a major crash. Because we have a system now which is separate pockets of information. I mean, in my old age, I've tried to put it together. Whether you think I'm a success or not is another matter altogether. But I do try to put it together. But that is not common. People work in silos, don't they? Mm.
You ponder your great-grandson and what his future will be. And I look at my own daughters and I watch them, and they are entirely dependent on the mobile phone. It is giving them an effect. It is affecting their brains. Picking up on the question from the audience, it seems to me that the one thing that is most absolutely untrue that you presented on the slide is Homo sapiens. It seems as if we don't have any wisdom at all.
Well, of course, we named ourselves, don't we? And we are well known for being. We're not self-effacing, are we? Humans. We fancy ourselves. In a peculiar way, we have to. You know, I'm obsessed by this influence of power, right? Powerlessness is a pathology, isn't it? But once you have some power, then actually that gives you a degree of self-confidence, and you think, oh, yeah, I'm sapiens. It's very difficult to get the right balance, isn't it? And our deficiencies have also been our successes. You look at wars. You know, I mean, the classic example is penicillin, isn't it? You know, I mean, penicillin was discovered in 1928. I mean, it's a very simple little example. 1928. The people that discovered it didn't know how to purify the chemical penicillin because they didn't have freeze drying. And then when the war came, it became an imperative. And so the money was thrown at it, and the lab in Oxford and then a lab in Toronto developed a system to purify and generate penicillin on a scale because it was so important, because there was a war on. Probably if there hadn't been a war, it might have been another 20 years before penicillin was purified on scale. You know, that's us, isn't it? We're a very strange group of people.
I should find a way of rounding off this excellent session, Gareth, by sort of reminding ourselves, as you did, that there was a hole in the ozone layer and science did darn it up. We're not entirely stupid, we are still wise, and among us there is the wisdom of people like Emeritus Professor Gareth Wyn Jones, who still ponders things and gives us, I think, despite everything you arrayed before us today, some hope, because hope comes from the thinking of people like yourself. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Gareth.
Diolch i chi.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much. Before I finish, I'd also like to thank John Gower as well, who chaired the end session, and again, just to thank Gareth for a fascinating talk and a lot of thinking for us in that presentation. There are copies of the book available to buy outside, so if you want to delve deeper.
On behalf of Ali, I recommend the book. Some of it is interesting.
And then also keep an eye out for the other events that we have coming up. We have a launch of an exciting new literary magazine. I think that's next Tuesday night on the 15th at 7 o'clock here in the Drum and also online. We have a talk with Peter Lord and Oliver Fairclough on Wednesday the 23rd, looking at the role of patrons in Welsh art. That's on the 23rd of April. And also we have guided tours of the exhibition upstairs, No Welsh Art, happening on the first Wednesday of every month at 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. So grab your tickets for those now. But with that, can I just thank both Gareth and John very much and to you also for your presence, both here and online. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Have a very good day.